Hey everybody, it's Anna. So this is an unscheduled live stream. So those of you who find it, maybe you're just meant to find it. And those of you who see it later, that's cool. You can check back in then. In fact, I was trying to decide if I even wanted to do this because my mind's kind of spinning over this, but I just thought I would give it a shot. So if you do happen to catch this live, and you wouldn't mind letting me know if you can hear me. Of course, if you can't hear me, then you can't really tell me, right? But someone is probably going to tell me they can't hear me. So I'm just going to keep talking until someone tells me they can't hear me. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about atonement, which is the central doctrine or belief system behind, I would say, most Christian traditions, which is the one I was raised in. And so as I've said probably multiple times, belief systems are tools. So they're there for a reason. They're there to create something or to solve a problem. All tools are there to solve a problem. So I try to be very neutral around tools because they're just functionally something functional you're using to solve a problem that's in front of you. I also want to hold tools very lightly because, if you're an expansive energy, which most of my clients are, then you actually outgrow tools. You outgrow paradigms and mindsets because it's what worked for you now doesn't work for you later, right? So I try to be very neutral around tools, but I'm not neutral around atonement theory, which is a tool. It's a belief system. And so I've been kind of asking myself, is it just my personal history that makes me do I have a grudge against atonement theory? Is that what I'm working on? Or is there something else? And I realized I had a client recently who's working on healing some stuff, right? And so we hit on atonement theory, and I realized the basic premise of atonement theory, as is true of many tools, the reason behind the tool is because there's a problem it's trying to solve. And the problem atonement theory is trying to solve is that we're not lovable. Okay. That's the belief that we are not lovable. So atonement theory, in case you're not familiar with Christian theology, is the idea that we are separated from God, right? Like God, we have sinned or fallen away, and now God is separated from us, right? So the theory is that chasm is so big that we can't possibly cross it, and somehow even God can't cross it. So what God does is send Jesus, who's the Christ in the Christian tradition, who then dies, sacrifices himself to take on the sins of the world so that he can eliminate this chasm, and now we can be at one with God. Atonement is basically at one-ment, atonement, right? So the idea is that we are helplessly, hopelessly lost and broken and damaged. Even God can't really agree to that. So we have to solve it. And the way we solve it is Jesus, who's a perfect human who never has any sins of his own, sacrifices and pays the price, right? Okay, so that's atonement theory. And you can already hear where the wound is in atonement theory, which is we are unlovable, we are broken, and we are irredeemable on our own, right? We don't really have any good qualities. There's nothing about us to recommend us to God, or at least it's not enough for God to forgive us. So we're basically we've all earned our own condemnation. Now, the way atonement theory tries to solve that is by saying, well, yes, you are a worm, which is, you find that in literature a lot. You're a worm, you're a rat, you are these things, but God loves you anyway. And so God's going to forgive that and sort of brush it aside with the help of the sacrifice of Jesus. And so now you're going to go to heaven. Now that kind of solves the problem, because now you're not afraid of being condemned, because your mind is practicing this tool, this theory that says you're okay, you're going to heaven, right? Now there's a few problems with this. you might expect I would say a few problems. One of them is that even though the mind is being reassured that it's safe now because God has forgiven it, it still remembers that God wasn't going to forgive it beforehand. Like, this is conditional, right? And that's still there. Like, well, there was a time when I wasn't lovable, and that means that this love is kind of conditional. It's a bit of a whimsical God we're dealing with here. I don't know. I'm putting all my eggs in this basket that God's forgiven me, even though God didn't forgive me before. That's kind of a splinter in the mind, right? That there's a problem there. And secondly, because that problem is there, there's a splinter in our sense of safety, our basic sense of being loved and safe in the world. Like that anxiety kind of pushes out on other people, which is what you're going to see in a lot of not every Christian community, but a lot of Christian communities where they identify the evil in the world, right? They're like, well, that person's evil, that community is evil. And what they're doing is the mind is feeling insecure about its own belovedness, um, because it remembers a time when it remembers that love is conditional. It's conditional on whether they are believing the right things and doing the right things, right? And that's the conditions. And the conditions have been met, so now you're okay, but love is conditional, and that's an anxiety producing place to live in. So they look at other people and say, well, that person's doing this thing that is unforgivable, that's really bad, that's outside the pale, right? And the reason they're so concerned about that is because they're anxious with it. Anytime you see someone really going after another person, it's because something inside of them, that conflict's internal. We all know that, right? We all know that theoretically, but it's true. It's actually true. So if you're attacking different religions, or attacking different communities like trans people or gay people or women or other countries, or Democrats, Republicans, it doesn't matter what your group is. It's a symptom of a mind that's not at ease. The mind does not actually feel safe in the world. It's trying to talk itself into feeling safe. It's trying to convince itself that this deity is safe and loving, but it already has a wound, an unsolved wound that proves that this deity is not unconditionally loving. Okay. So again, if a tool is working for you, then I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to try to argue that tool. There's no reason to argue against a tool that is doing its job. With my clients, though, as I was saying, I have a client just this week who has a belief in atonement theory, and I had to push on it because this wound is actually in the way of her healing. Okay, this is the wound she has to heal right now to continue in expansion. And she and my clients are ones that cannot live with wounds that can be healed. They're built to heal, right? Which means that they can't make peace with a wound that can be healed. I don't know if that makes sense, but I describe it as the princess and the pea, which is the story of the princess, to figure out if this young woman, she says she's a princess, right? And she comes to this tavern, and the mother's like, I'm going to find out if she's a real princess. And she puts her on 100 matches, and underneath the bottom mattress, she puts a pea, right? And only a real princess can feel the pea. Well, I always say my clients are the princesses who can feel the pea. Like if there's a pea, we can feel it. So the challenge is that the system that was built to soothe us around this wound, finally that system doesn't do its job. We can feel the pea, we can feel the wound, we have to solve it. So in that situation, we are going to have to heal the wound, which will finally topple the structure that was created to solve the wound. And so, when people talk about being afraid that if you start pulling one thread, you're going to pull the whole thing down. That's true. When a structure is ready to go down, you just, you start poking at it here and there. Eventually it will fall apart. And that's scary for the mind, because the mind usually, it mistakenly puts its sense of security, whatever security it feels, it puts it in the structure, when actually in this case, the structure has been built around the wound, which is inherently destabilizing. So eventually, for the mind to get stable, to truly feel stable, we have to actually solve the wound, which means we don't need the structure any longer. So I don't have any comments right now, so that's cool. But if Sebastian's here, good. So I'll check with you in a minute, Sebastian. So what was I going to say? So the challenge then is the mind. What we're trying to do with the mind in my work with my clients is we want the mind to realize security is not ever in a structure. The structure is there to kind of as a stopgap, to kind of solve a problem until we're ready, not to solve it, to kind of soothe over a problem until we're ready to come back to it, right? Okay. So some people never come back to it. Like the soothing of the problem is sufficient. They don't really feel that pee under all the mattresses. They can sleep on the mattresses fine with that pee under there. They're not really, they're not sensitive in that way. But if you are sensitive in that way, then you will either find the source of the pain and solve it, or you will be miserable. I mean, and my clients and I can attest to that. There's a kind of misery that comes from trying to make peace with something you cannot make peace with, and your mind kind of constantly feeling that irritation. So let me read what Sebastian said. It says, I interpret atonement as esoteric and not literal. The Messiah's sacrifice surrender to the I'm sorry, I was right slower. The Messiah's sacrifice is surrender to the divine, not a savage, pointless death. Religion is not a great place for abstract thinking, though. I mean, I think that, yeah. So a lot of people think of atonement theory as literal. So yeah, but see, again, any system that makes sense for you is fine. Like, I think that and actually, if you have heard of the book I wrote, which is called The Gospel According to Tarot, I actually walk through the story of Jesus with the second half of the major arcana, because I agree. I think that there's a way to see the stories of the Christ or of the Buddha or of any, religious seeker as the story of humans. Like, and there is a surrender part. That actually is what we're trying to get the mind to do when it releases the structure. Let go of the structure, surrender to the divine within me. There is a divine within ourselves. But if your structure places the divine outside yourself, which is what religion does, and then solves the problem by reaching out to that divine, okay, which is how atonement theory works. We are separated from the divine, okay? That's how atonement theory, that's the basis of it. We are separated from the divinity. We're going to stay lost unless there is some kind of intervention made, and the Christ comes and dies and pays the debt. And if you spend any time in any Christian traditions for very long, you will hear this language. This is not in their case, they don't think it's esoteric. They think it feels literal to them. The mind is being very literal about this structure. So that means that the divine is outside yourself, right? And that means, and since the divine has already proven itself to be untrustworthy, because he was going to send you to hell because, you're not perfect. That means this is a divine outside of you, and not that trustworthy. And the shift is when we let go of that structure, and not just let go of the structure. You have to solve the pain point. You have to go back and solve the trauma, which is the key thing. The mind doesn't let go of structures until it's convinced it doesn't need that structure any longer. And even if you had a really fine childhood, like I had a fine childhood, nothing, like I was parented well, I had resource, I was safe, but it doesn't matter. Because it doesn't matter if that's true or not for you, because what the human journey is like is you come on the planet, this little wild child energy. You're perfectly fine being unconditionally loved. You demand to be unconditionally loved. Actually, you cry, and at some point though, something happens where you get hurt, and that whether that is you actually have like physical abuse, physical neglect. Some of us have that in our story. Or, like for me, my truly, this sounds silly, but it wasn't silly to me, right? My first trauma was my baby sister was born, right? And I was 10 and a half months old. I was still a baby and my sister was born. So there's this, and it was abandonment. I experienced abandonment. And so whatever that moment is where you discover something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong because we live in a physical plane, not a spiritual plane. So this little new soul comes into the planet from the spiritual plane and then discovers that the physical plane has these challenges built in. And because you are so little, and when we are so little, we think the world revolves around us. That's quite naturally how we feel. We think we did something wrong or something is wrong with us. That's how the mind interprets that first big hurt. And so now the mind has to figure out what to do about this problem. We are not lovable. We are a mistake. We're not cute enough. We're not smart enough. Something is wrong with us. And that something that's wrong with us makes us in danger, because it's endangering our lovability. And when you're a baby, when you're a small child, love is how you survive. Love isn't just about feeling like, oh, I'm appreciated. You survive because people value you and they invest in you and they love you. So if there is something about me that makes me unlovable, my well-being is at stake. It's a survival issue. So now we've got this moment of true trauma, even though it's easy for an adult to overlook it. We have a moment of true trauma that the mind is trying to solve because it believes that trauma holds with it danger for us. And then we can see why atonement theory answers that trauma. It doesn't answer it. I keep saying that. It responds to that trauma. Yes, you know what? you are not cute enough, you're not smart enough, and you're not really lovable. But yet, God is going to kind of clear the mess you've made or whatever the mess you are out of the way so you can be loved and you can be saved. So now your safety is kind of reestablished. So, but it's a clunky tool for those of us who are the princesses who can feel the pee, right? Because it kind of makes you feel a little better, but over time, as you get older and you're here, you're not just here to like deal with this. So if you have this system and you're not going to ever do new things in your life, which is fine. There's lots of people that live in a status quo experience, right? So they're kind of they're doing the same things with their life every day. And again, I sound like I'm criticizing it. I'm not trying to criticize it. My husband is one of these people that he'd probably eat the same meal every day, and he would have the same conversations with the same people every day for his whole life, and he would find meaning in that. So that's a lovely thing. But if you're not kind of always expanding, um, then the current tools you have might match you for longer or maybe for your whole life. It's when you're ready to expand and these tools are in your way, right? And you can feel it. You can feel like this used to work for me, but now I'm feeling stifled. I'm feeling stuck. I'm feeling like I can't breathe properly because something is in the way of this expansion. And that's when it's time to throw a tool away because it first heal the trauma that made the tool necessary, and then you can release the tool, and then your mind has to kind of start over with a blank slate. So I think that while I don't try to like attack tools head on, because I do realize they're valuable and they're functioning in the way they're supposed to function. It's when they're in the way that it's time. And that's when I'm working with the client and I'm like, yeah, I didn't address this head on because it wasn't time to, but now it's time. And this one client, she has a story in her head that kind of goes into, well, I'm not very kind, I'm not very loving. Like it's kind of a negative story, which is directly connected to the wound she has, which is connected to the atonement theory tool she's using. So I did challenge it a little. I didn't go so far as to say, well, you're going to have to let go of this whole theory, right? Or this whole doctrine. But over time, when you heal the wound, you start living beyond that structure and you just naturally, you'll leave behind these old stories, these old ideas that are too small for you. And if that's your life path, if your life path is about innovating, creating, expanding, kind of breaking down your own barriers and seeing how far you can go, because you're one of the people on the planet that is breaking new ground. And that is some of us. Some of us are here to do new things. And that means you're kind of always going where no one's gone before. Then you have to have more and more of your faculties available, and you have to have more and more freedom. And these old tools are no longer helpful. So yeah, that's all I have to say today. I hope that made some sense. And so if anybody wants to comment, you're free to do so. But yeah, I'm going to stop for now. And I'm going to try to get a tarot story done this week. I know I have been not doing that for a few weeks, but I'm going to try to do it tomorrow, release them tomorrow. So hopefully you'll see a tarot story from me. But until then, I will see you next time. Bye.